Let's explore autistic history and the Autism Wars. This is part 28 in this series. We are picking back up in the autistic community happenings back in 1991, 1992 era, these early 90s for sure. And at this point, Autistic Network International has been launched and is happening, and Jim Sinclair is writing about the experience of this organization and community network that comes from this and the experiences between this autistic-led organization, the experiences they went through with parent-founded autism organizations, and just so much gaslighting and stuff. But I'm going to jump back in here right about where we left off in the last video and share some more autistic history with you. So, Jim Sinclair and other autistics are at a 1991 conference for Autism Society of America, and they were approached by a board member and some other parents at that conference and asked if they would like to help form a committee that would be advisory to the board and would have some input into ASA and its future conferences. And it says here, we accepted on the spot. We were told that our committee would be allowed to have a representative present at ASA board meetings, would have some input into planning the 1992 National Conference, both in the organization of facilities to be accessible to autistic people and in the selection of presentations, and would be given space in the ASA newsletter. In addition, when we told them that we were already working on forming an organization of our own, they offered us some unspecified amount of financial and or administrative support for creating our own self-advocacy organization. None of these promises, none of them were honored. The only mention the ASA newsletter carried of our attempts at autistic self-advocacy was an item in the crisis of the July 1991 board meeting, authorizing one of the board members to take charge of organizing an advisory committee of autistic people. And we're so used to it now, but it was so surprising back then. Sinclair and advocates never heard from them again about that committee. Despite several follow-up phone calls I made, one of the ASA board members later confirmed my suspicion, again this is Jim Sinclair's words, that these offers were merely empty gestures by a board that wanted to impress parents of autistic people who hold most of the voting, did I say that right? The voting power, there we go, in ASA, but who didn't expect to have to follow through because they never expected autistic people to be capable of organizing ourselves. When, contrary to expectations, we did begin organizing ourselves and announce the establishment of ANI, ASA continued to ignore the announcements we repeatedly submitted for inclusion in the newsletter. But now there did begin to be some acknowledgement of the existence of autistic people trying to self-advocate in the form of rumors. This is how they know they're getting heard, in the form of rumors. So many pattern points showing themselves in this article, huh? Things that autistic activists and allies are really used to by now, all these decades later. we know it as the MO, but back then it was very shocking and very surprising because these advocates thought that there was room for bridging and working together. It's not what they got. So, but now there did begin to be some acknowledgement of the existence of autistic people trying to self-advocate in the form of rumors started by some ASA board members to the effect that I, shock and awe, was not really autistic. This is despite of the fact that my records had been reviewed by 2 psychologists who were members of the ASA Professional Advisory Board. And both had stated, one of them under oath at a rehabilitation services hearing, that I'm indeed autistic. In a clear attempt to undermine our group cohesion, Kathy and some other autistic adults were directly warned that I was not what I claimed to be. Oh, these feeling familiar, these patterns. 2023, woof, these patterns are still going strong. So, all right, meanwhile, Donna was encountering similar denunciations as her book began to receive international attention. Context and politics of opposition to self-advocacy. At the time all of this was happening, it took me completely by surprise. Nearly all of us who were involved in the earliest periods of ANI had met many parents of autistic children at conferences and local parent support groups. Almost invariably, the parents were pleased and excited to hear from us. True. Their primary interest was in using us as resources for their children rather than supporting us in our own goals. But still, they were not hostile towards us. It seems that one autistic person at a time, and preferably a passive one, might be welcomed as an interesting novelty or an amusing diversion, or possibly even a valuable source of information and insight. But autistic people organizing together, autistic people pursuing our own interests rather than furthering the interests of parents and professionals, and suddenly we were perceived as a threat. Only several years later, while researching the history of self-advocacy by disabled people, did I learn of the long history of similar opposition to attempts at self-advocacy and self-determination by people with a variety of disabilities. Any attempt by a group of disempowered people to challenge the status quo, to dispute the presumption of their incompetence to redefine themselves as equals of the empowered class, to assert independence and self-determination, has been met by remarkably similar efforts to discredit them. And at this point, Sinclair goes into the discrediting tactics that are most frequently used, and I am going to pick up there in the next video and talk about these discrediting tactics that are used today, and they have been in use for, well, this is the 90s, and as Sinclair states here, it's not specific to autistic community, but it is a phenomenon that happens to disabled people while we're self-advocating. So this is an extension to autistics here. So I will share those in full in the next video. We are still in the early 90s here, but we're learning about the autistic community and what they were doing in this era and what those interactions were like with the autistic community and the autism community. So we're going to pick up right there in the next video. Thank you so much for sharing this time with me and learning a little bit more about autistic history.